Is atheism on the rise in Spain?
Yeah, it is, because the Catholic Church is losing more and more influence in the society.
I did get the Urantia book when I was young, and it made a big influence on me for wanting to have a family and children.
Olga's been an ardent seeker of truth who joins us from Barcelona, Spain. She has a professional background in computer analyst and a passion for philosophy. And Olga has been a dedicated reader and scholar of the Urantia book since 1995, I think. And her commitment to exploring the teachings of the book has led her to author 5 novels and numerous other works, deeply inspired by the book wisdom of the Urantia book. And in addition to her literary accomplishments, Olga's got 2 adult daughters.
She plays a pivotal role in the Urantia community as the manager of the Spanish branch of UBIS and as a trustee of Urantia Foundation. I'm sure her insightful perspectives on family life and society will inspire and enlighten us today.
And Olga will be joined from paper 72 of the Urantia book. She delves into the fascinating topic of family on a neighboring planet. She asks the question, how far are we? She will explore the intricate details of extraterrestrial family dynamics, offering comparisons with our own societal structures, and shedding light on how we can enhance family life here on Earth. We turn it over to you, Olga.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Cher. Family life on the neighboring planet. How far are we? Paper 72 of the Urantia book, Government on a Neighboring Planet, has always been one of my favorites. I especially like this paper because it describes a society that, while not perfect, is in many ways closer to utopia than the most advanced societies on Urantia. And not only that, but it's also a type of society that would be feasible on this planet right now, if only a little will were put into implementing many of the ideas that these Satania brethren have already made a reality. Hence, my great interest in this paper and in the ideas that the revelators suggest to us when describing this extraterrestrial civilization. Before I begin to describe the very interesting measures that have been carried out in this world related to family life, I would like to highlight the exceptional fact that such a paper has been part of the revelation. Let us remember that we are isolated from the rest of the system by a quarantine that has been firmly in place for hundreds of thousands of years. Humans on one planet do not know what is going on in other humanities, on other worlds, and we have no way of knowing it for ourselves. The revelators, with the permission of our system's sovereign, Lana Forge, have given us the great gift of explaining to us how another civilization lives, thus bridging the great problem of distances. Almost at the end of this paper appears the main reason, which is in this quote. This recital of the affairs of a neighboring planet is made by special permission with the intent of advancing civilization and augmenting governmental evolution on Urantia. And having said that, let us now turn to one of the experts of the most advanced nation on this neighboring planet, which is the one that has brought us to this symposium, family life. In paper 72, there's an entire section, section number 3, devoted exclusively to family life. Right from the beginning, we are told that the civilization of the neighboring planet has social customs very different from ours. We will review, point by point, the characteristics of family life in this alien nation following the guide below. First, exposure of the measures taken on the neighboring planet. And second, situation in Urantian societies. And third, my personal experience as a mother of 2 young adult daughters. And finally, one aspect that I would like us all to discuss, which is to consider whether each of these items is a desirable measure or characteristic to be applied in our societies. So let's go to the first of these points, which is that two families are not allowed to live under the same roof. In the alien nation, not only does each family have its own house, but there is also a minimum home site permitted, which is 50,000 square feet of land, 4,600 square meters. That's a good size plot. To get an idea, a possible configuration would be 250 feet wide by 200 feet long, or in meters, 100 per 46 meters. And let's remember that would be the minimum size. Land and properties are favored for use as family housing, as they are tax-free up to 10 times the minimum allowed per dwelling. So, how far are we? If we compare with what happens in Urantian societies, here we find an important difference. Economic necessity often forces two families to live under the same roof. In Spain, the cost of housing, whether owned or rented, has increased enormously in recent years and represents a very important part of the usual expenses, which means that, especially among young people, people share apartments with people with whom they have no family or even friendship ties. This inability to obtain housing has delayed the emancipation of young people and the infantilization of those who have managed to emancipate themselves at the expense of sharing housing with others, since they find it impossible to form a family. In my country, 65% of young people between the ages of 18 and 34 still live at home with their parents. The right to decent housing is enshrined in the Spanish Constitution, but in practice, it is more of a toast to the sun than a guarantee for citizens. Today, housing is an investment rather than a right, which has caused prices to rise like crazy. In addition, there is a great shortage of housing financed with public money, and rental subsidies are not sufficient. As of my personal experience, in my generation and my parents' generation, it was possible to own a home without it stifling the family economy. We own a house with no mortgage, but my oldest daughter, she is 30 years old, is sharing an apartment with two other young women, and my youngest daughter, 26 years old, lives with us and has no job. It is clear to both that they will not be able to own a home, nor will they be able to afford to rent by themselves unless the situation changes drastically. So the second point is that single life is penalized on this neighboring planet. In the alien nation, after a certain age, 30 years old, if you're not married and since you cannot live with your parents, you have to move into group dwellings with other single people. Group dwellings have been outlawed for families. Only single people can live in them. Again, how far are we? In today's Spanish society, and given that it's difficult to get a house, it is precisely the creation of a family that is penalized and single life is encouraged. In addition, and despite how connected young people are with social networks, they have difficulty socializing in real life and finding a partner. About my personal experience, my oldest daughter, who is more sociable, has a good group of friends with whom she goes out every weekend, but she doesn't have a boyfriend and is not planning to have children yet. My youngest daughter doesn't go out at night and has a very limited social life, as most of her friends live far away from Barcelona, where we live. So they are two different characters, but the result is the same. No partner in sight and no plans to have a family. So let's go to now point number 3, parental schools of child culture. In this society, responsible parenting is advocated to the point that both fathers and mothers must attend parental schools of child culture, regardless of where they live, If they cannot attend a school in person, they take this course by correspondence. How far are we? Once again, the difference with even the most advanced of our societies is big. As far as I know, there's nothing similar in any country in the world, and even less so if we consider that on the neighboring planet, these courses are compulsory. About my personal experience, like so many other parents in the world, we had to learn to be parents through trial and error, based on love and common sense, combined with moments of anguish and anxiety. Here, I must emphasize the importance of the support of the family and friends network that, although imperfect, helps to go through the experience of parenthood. Next point, family size and care of orphans. In the alien nation, families have an average of 5 children, so they are large by Western standards. Another notable difference is that in this society, there are no orphanages. Instead, full orphans are placed in the care of another family, who must go through a parental court to prove that they are worthy of the honor or guardianship of a full orphan. How far are we? Looking at the fertility rate by country, we see that in Western societies, we are far from average. We only see this average in African countries, like you can see in the slide. In Spain, for example, the rate is about 1.2, not far from the bottom, where South Korea and Hong Kong stand out with an average of 0 children, according to the World Bank. Significantly, until 2003, a large family in Spain was a family with 4 children and received some state aid, although not much, such as tax benefits, university scholarships, etc. After that year, the definition changed to 3 children instead of 4. Today, it is rare to see families with more than 1 or 2 children between the generations of childbearing age. Concerning adoptions, in Urantian societies, not only the adoption mechanisms are very different. The vast majority will never consider adopting an orphan unless it was someone from their own family. In Spain, the adoption procedures are long and the conditions for adoption are very rigid, which makes families interested in adopting go to other countries. Historically, the most common countries have been China and Russia, in the case of Spain, although now they are implementing more restrictive policies. It is also true that it involves an important economic expense that not everybody can afford. About my personal experience, well, I have 2 daughters, and although I would have liked to have a 3rd child, we were not only held back by the economic issue, but also by the difficulty of combining work with childcare. In Spain, there are not enough daycare centers, and the ones that do exist are a major expense in the family economy. Besides the fact that their schedules do not exactly fit in with work schedules. In my country, parents rely heavily on the family network, especially grandparents, to take care of their children while they are working. Concerning adoptions, I have no first-hand experience. As for my daughter's friends, some of them are now starting to have children, but most of them do not have children and do not have the favorable circumstances to have them. Let's go to point number 5, the home as the fundamental institution. In the alien nation, the home is considered the basic institution of their civilization, where children are educated and their character is trained. Both fathers and mothers are involved in this training. How far are we from that? Although it is true that the family in our world is also the basic institution of civilization, it is also true that mothers are still more involved than fathers in the upbringing of their children and bear most of the burden of running a household. For example, in Spain, this is changing very gradually, and men are taking on more tasks, but the distribution is still far from equal. If we look at other societies, there's still a long way to go. And my personal experience, at home, we have always tried to share the household chores equally, and the children's education has not been an exception. It is true that our work schedules have helped us, as both my husband and I have always had the afternoons free, which has allowed us to be more present in the education of our daughters. Let's go to point number 6, sex education. On the neighboring planet, parents or legal guardians are responsible for providing sex education at home. Again, how far are we? In general, in Western societies, sex education is carried out in schools and among families, or at least in theory. In the specific case of Spain, I would dare to say that there is still a long way to go. It depends a lot on the progressive or conservative disposition of families to dedicate time to sex education for children and young people. With the conservative way that we are experiencing, not only in my country, but also in Europe and in other societies around the world, more and more obstacles are being placed in the way of a sex education that doesn't repress the sexual life of adolescents and is open to all sexual orientations and identities. In addition, during the last few years, an alarming fact is taking place in Spain. The use of cell phones without restriction and without parental supervision among children and pre-adolescents is causing them to be very exposed to pornography and to think that what they watch there is normal sexual behavior, which is leading to more sexual aggressions at younger ages. About my personal experience, at home, we have always answered questions about sex education with complete naturalness and have supported the education they have received at school. Point number 7, moral education. On the neighboring planet, education is provided by teachers. How far are we? Here we can see considerable differences. At least in my country, moral education has not been given in schools with the attention it deserves, and has always been a minor subject if it was present at all. Nor has it been a practically oriented training, but rather to give theoretical knowledge about what has been the history of morality and how philosophers have considered it over time. So we could say that the source of moral values is mainly the family. In my personal experience, and in the absence of moral education as such in schools, at home, we have tried to give our daughters an education in values, but rather as situations arose, not as a formal education. And it has proved to be very effective. Let's go to point number 8, religious education. In the alien nation, religious instruction is the exclusive privilege of parents, since religion is considered an integral part of home life. Religion is such a family matter that there are no public places set aside exclusively for religious meetings. Not so many years ago, spiritual teachers periodically visited each family to verify whether the children were receiving proper religious instruction by their parents. How far are we? In Spain, for example, religious education has been left in the hands of the schools, mainly Catholic religious schools. Catholicism, although it has been declining over the years, is still the majority religion in my country. In Spain, the teaching of the Catholic religion was compulsory until 2006, but from then on, children, or rather their parents, can choose between religion or ethics. As far as the home is concerned, parents have always acted as reinforcement for the school, but they have not carried the burden of religious education. I dare say that in other societies, the situation is more or less similar. In my personal experience, although both my husband and I are readers of Urantia Book, we have not engaged in teaching the content to our daughters in a systematic way and had been lax about it. My daughters believe in God and sympathize with the teachings of the book. I always say that they are Urantia Book friendly, but they are not readers. They have not had religion in the school, but ethics. And let's go to point number 9, parental guardianship until age 15. In this society, children are under the legal guardianship of their parents until they are 15, when they are initiated for the first time to civic responsibilities. From then on, obligations towards parents are reduced, and new civic and social responsibilities towards the state are assumed. In addition, the minimum age to vote is 20, to marry without parental consent is 25, and as mentioned above, no one over the age of 30 can continue to live at home with their parents. So we see that on the neighboring planet, a lot of importance is given to the maturity that age gives when it comes to participating in society. How far are we? As you can see, the difference with our planet is very significant in this aspect. In Spain, for example, the age of majority is 18 years old, at which point you can vote, have a driving license, motorcycles can be driven at 16, be criminally responsible for your actions, drink alcohol, get married without the need for parental consent, and other rights and obligations. In other countries, this may be at 19, 20, or 21, and may or may not include certain legal rights. In any case, emancipation on Urantia is not usually gradual, but it seems that with the age of majority, a person's legal status changes from one day to the next. And here we come to the last point to be discussed in this presentation. Point number 10, marriage and divorce. In this society, permission to marry is only granted 1 year after having applied for it, and after both bride and groom have presented certificates attesting that they have been duly instructed in the parental schools on the responsibilities of married life. As for divorce, there are fewer restrictions than for marriage, but the decrees of separation cannot be obtained until 1 year after filing for it. Even so, the divorce rate is 1/10 that on the civilized races of Urantia. How far are we? In general, in Urantia societies, there are no premarital courses to follow, at least not obligatory. In Spain, at least in Catholic marriages, there are some kind of pre-marriage classes that are usually given by a priest or a married couple that volunteer in the parish. For the past few years, civil weddings have been outnumbering religious weddings in Spain. According to the Spanish National Statistics Institute, INE, in 2019, the last year with complete data, there were 65.8% civil weddings compared to 34.2% religious weddings. And civil weddings in no case require premarital courses. The percentage of couples living together without being legally married has also been increasing. In 2020, this percentage, according to the INE, reached 18% of households. Of this, some may eventually marry, but now by law, those who do not wish to marry cannot be penalized. And unmarried couples are already guaranteed the right to receive widows' pensions and other state benefits, among others that years ago only married people enjoyed. As for divorce, the divorce rate has been rising in Spain since it was legalized in 1981, which reflects the attitude towards marriage and the stability of marital relationships. In Spain, for example, the divorce rate is 2.1 per 1,000 inhabitants, 1.49 per 1,000 married people. In the US, for instance, divorce rate is slightly higher, 2.9 per 1,000 inhabitants. As a developed country, my country follows the trend of other similar countries. While the divorce rate is increasing, the marriage rate is decreasing. Regarding the time that passes from the time the divorce is filed until it becomes effective, it depends on many factors, especially if the divorce is by mutual agreement or not. If there is agreement between both parties, it can be completed in a matter of a few months. If there is no agreement, the divorce can take years to become effective. So my personal experience, and since I had a Catholic wedding, I had to take a premarital course, which in our case was given by the priest who married us. It basically dealt with very common sense things, and frankly, it seemed to me that someone who has taken a vow of chastity doesn't have much authority to talk about married life or marriage. In my case, I have been happily married for 34 years and I have no intentions of that changing soon. As I have mentioned before, my daughters are currently single and unmarried. As for divorces, it's not uncommon to know some family or friends who are divorced. For example, my sister is. And this is the end of this quick review of family life on the neighboring planet, which I think gives us a good starting point to discuss and reflect on whether Urantian societies can or should apply these measures and come closer to the alien society. I look forward to your comments, and it's discussion time.
Well, thank you, Olga. So we open this up to any questions or comments about Olga's presentation from anyone on the panel. Please go ahead.
Louis.
Thank you. Thank you, Olga, for sharing with us your reflections and personal experiences on that section of paper 72. I personally would like to start by reminding ourselves that for the Urantia book, the family is the quintessential institution for spiritual development, right? And what I find fascinating about paper 72 is that they give us this context of this particularly most advanced section of that country living in this particular section of a continent as inspiration, as guidance, as benchmark, I suppose, to look at our own government, because the paper is about the government in a neighboring planet, right? But they make sure to introduce in that same paper aspects about family life. And what is fascinating for me to put that in the broader context of the Urantia book is that if the family is the quintessential institution for spiritual learning, education, and development, the other two aspects that help planets like ours become civilized for the Urantia book is the acquirement of civilization through other two areas of living existence, which are philosophy and science. Interestingly, of those three different areas, the only one that is direct responsibility of the parents is scientific education, spiritual education, religious education, right? We have institutions for philosophy somehow, not so well developed. We have institutions for science, also questionably well developed. But what you have shared with us as a benchmark for what we would find to be desirable or not for Urantia itself leaves two reflections on my mind. One is, on the one hand, that there is no guarantee that our planet as a whole will progress together, because in this neighboring planet, there's some areas that have gone backwards or stagnated, and this particular area isolated itself. So we need to see that as a potential risk if we do not unify in trying to become civilized together as much as possible. And at the core of that is the family spiritual and religious education that, in my view, will trigger the developments in the other two fundamental institutions of the civilized society for our planet. So that's the first idea that I want to leave on the table, maybe for dialogue and conversation. And thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Any comments on Luis, what Luis brought forward? Okay.
Yes, comments on Luis, and also, well, on Olga's presentation as well. Luis, very interesting points about science and philosophy. I think in general, the problem we have in Urantia is that at some point we took maybe a different route than this more civilized country or civilization, and also we departed very much from the normal progression of a planet where everything is more, I want to say regulated, but it's more, the progress of a civilization is more guided in an normal planet where you still have the planetary headquarters and so on. And it seems to me that this neighboring planet, although they are also in a similar situation as we are, I think in quarantine and also without a planetary guidance, they take matters more into their own hands in guiding their own civilization more actively. Whereas for us, it's very free for all. We enjoy lots of liberties, but also my feeling is that we have a very big lack of guidance and guidance in how to advance our society as a whole in many aspects, maybe not in all aspects. We are making progress, but in many other aspects we are not. The Urantia book says itself that our technological advancement is disproportionate in regards to other areas, in particular spiritual, moral. And also I would say that philosophically we are kind of in philosophy is in a very confused state right now. We departed a long time ago from the hopes of modernism, enlightenment a little bit, and we are more in disarray or in a state of confusion, also as the Urantia book states. And for me, the core is to maybe science is our hope. Our society seems to have a lot of respect of scientific studies have shown that, and there are also scientific studies in the areas of psychology, sociology, and so on, and they can help us bring the family to the role, the important role that it should have in our civilization. But I see many things that this neighboring planet is doing a little bit difficult to implement, in particular in our Western world, where we want to enjoy liberties and don't want state intervention.
Thank you, Sebastian.
I could jump off of what Sebastian said about right now we have kind of a free-for-all. You know, we don't have things like required parenting courses in order to raise children and things like that. And I can definitely see how that's the case, and kind of also linking it back to what Luis said about the fact that they brought forth the state of families, or the way in which families are structured or taken care of, or things like that in this paper on the government on a neighboring planet. I think that the family is sort of at the root of everything, and that's probably why they brought it forth, because when we have well-structured families, then we have well-balanced adults, and we have institutions like philosophical institutions and scientific institutions and governments that are going to be well-run because we have well-structured and well-balanced families. So I think that's really, I would guess that that is why they brought it forth, just because it is at the root of everything.
Thank you, Alice. Vicky, you had your hand up.
One of the things that comes to my mind when I'm hearing this presentation, and at the time that this was given to us through the Urantia book, there were stay-at-home moms was the norm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And nowadays, it's not really the norm. To income families, and then we get into these problems of the expense of childcare. And I just, had a question about that, maybe to Olga, is this, I know you said in your presentation that childcare is expensive in Spain, as it is here too. Is there any movement towards women being staying-at-home moms or staying-at-home dads, or sharing, maybe both have half-time jobs, sharing the childcare duties? Is there anything like that going on in Spain?
Well, now, fortunately, parents can enjoy some paternity leave, almost at the same amount of days than the mothers, so they can take care of their children. But it's something very recent, and it's changing, but very slowly, and it's still difficult when this paid leave disappears. What to do with the children, because as I said in my presentation, grandparents here are the people who take care of their grandchildren while their parents are out working. So it's it's a problem, because not everyone has this support, this family support to do that, and this is holding back many people to have more children, and I think it's a problem. It's true that there are more and more initiatives to try to solve this problem, but I think we need a global solution, being from the state or wherever, to solve this problem, because otherwise it's going to be more and more difficult to have children in the future.
Luis?
I guess Vicky's question goes some way towards what I was thinking when I think of Olga's presentation. Somehow, Paper 72 is also trying to help us look at ourselves and tries to give us some guidance as to how to deal with the most pressing problems that our societies are facing, right? And if we look at family, one of the biggest elephants in the room is the problem of sexual education and the links that sexual education has with sexual abuse and out of wedlock pregnancies. The numbers are staggering. This is a massive issue that we are facing as a planet. Depending on where you read and how global the statistics are, one out of every 3 women suffers either sexual, emotional, or physical abuse of some kind. About 40% of children born in Western societies are today born out of wedlock. And what is interesting about these numbers is that what does that actually say about the fabric of families and society that we have today? And it's not an easy problem that we will, by any stretch of the imagination, solve in a dialogue here. But I think beginning to have the necessary conversations that insert spiritual values in the way we try to educate our children early enough about sexual behavior, about sexual responsibility, about the consequences of being led by our pleasures and by our emotions in terms of growing into relationships is important. And as it is important to try to include in sexual education the importance of communication and negotiation between the two sexes, so that people are more encouraged to enter relationships despite all the challenges involved. As Olga's daughters are the case in Spain, generally in Europe is the case that most people are getting older before they get married, if they marry at all. There's a growing number of couples that are deciding not to have children, and I would argue that couples without children are not really families. They are just married couples. And so obviously the economic issue is there. But a last statistic that I will leave for the conversation is the wealthier the nation becomes, the more educated the nation becomes. Those two factors are in direct correlation with less marriages taking place, more divorces taking place, and less number of children being born into families. So this is something that is telling us something about the way societies function today on Urantia, given the models under which we function, that perhaps is something we can also try to address and discuss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. I know that, I'll just interject something. I mean, I'm listening to a pattern, and we've seen this throughout history, is I call it a pendulum swing. And I know that things always have to get to a certain point before they change and go back. And unfortunately, things get to a really bad point before they change. And then another unfortunate aspect is usually there's overcompensation for things. You know, you jump in and you try to overcorrect everything, and it just takes a long time for everything, for it to get back to the middle. You know, for it to come to, and I think that and addressing another thing that we talked about is our scattered. I'm going to call it the Western civilization. We're scattered, as opposed to on the neighboring planet, they've got a centralized location in their continent. They don't need anyone around them. So it seems like the way it's presented, a lot of the countries outside of the country they're telling us about are a bit more primitive and backwards. We're kind of scattered all over Europe and all over the US. So it's a long road. It's a long road to come.
And Sebastian, you're asking, is that a correlation you cited in your affairs on Urantia?
Yes.
Or is it something the revelators say?
Yeah. And the reason I ask that is, well, and Liz already answered that it's the way things happen in Urantia. And the reason I ask is that I think I'm right. I think that what has replaced as a big value for the time being in our society, maybe compromise with family or commitment to family, is as self-pleasure or self-centeredness, egoism, and I think that I think the explanation for the correlation that Luis cited is that as a country is more advanced, it's more economically affluent, then they can enjoy life more, and I think that's, I mean, it has also the case. I became a father, but just recently, and it was just I mean, in my mid 40s. We want to enjoy life first. We want to explore. We want to be free, and so on, and not commit to kids and family and so on. And if you have the means to do that, then people, given our current spiritual and philosophical background, we will tend to do that. So I think that it's good that societies get more affluent, or they have more possibilities. But then if we don't change the other aspect of what are our goals and priorities long term, we think very short term as a society, then we will observe the phenomenon that Luis was describing, right? Less marriages, less children or later, and more divorces, because everyone is so self-centered.
Yeah, and then the staggering, terrifying additional correlation to what I shared is that the wealthier and more educated the society, the less proclivity there is to have an expressed faith or belief in God.
And
so the poorer the nation, the less educated the nation, as things stand on Urantia today, the higher the proclivity of population to express a faith of some sort, or a belief in some church or in some God of some kind. And this is obviously the legacy of what the Urantia book tells us, at least in part, of the religions of authority, the authoritarian religions that have been imbuing fear-driven faith, so to speak, in affiliation, so that they can get some of the rewards that come with being affiliated, which are not only spiritual promises, but of many other kinds as well, as we know. So that is another element that is at play.
And Alice, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, so when Sebastian mentioned self-pleasure, made me think of something that Olga's presentation brought to my mind, which was just this question of why is this in here? And I think that they give us this paper and these details not so much to tell us that we all need to have 5 kids or we all need to have 50,000 square foot yards, but to emphasize that family can be a priority of a society, and that we can do more to emphasize the value of family, to structure our society in a way that is right for us, which probably isn't going to look like exactly what they describe in that paper. And so sort of a sub question that I was asking myself all throughout Olga's presentation is, how can we make this work for us?
What's the practical application?
Right. How does this work for our culture? And that is that's a big question for all the points that Olga made that I don't have the answers to. But that's kind of the overall value that I take from those points, is we can make this work. They're giving it to us because they have hope for us that we can achieve that emphasis in our society.
And Olga?
Thank you. Thank you, Alice.
Thanks, Bill. I would like to talk about concerning what you said before about younger generations that live day by day and they don't have long-term plan. I would like to say that as I see it, my daughters, they are living a very hard situation because there are lots of uncertainty in their lives. It's not like in my generation, for example, I was able to make long-term plans and to get a job and to hope that this job is, I will be working there for a long time and to save money and buy a house and create a family. But they don't have any of that. Very few people among the younger generations can do that, and it's really anguishing, and it makes that they live day by day. They enjoy life, and it's like they are eternal teenagers, so to speak. More of them. I don't want to make it general, but I see see it around that there is the trend. So they have works that are not well paid, and they are they are for months or years or whatever, but not long years. So it's I think it's well, they are very challenging times for them, and they have to, well, to solve this problem, and it's a big one. So well, I hope that well, that they can reverse the situation in some way and find some solutions, and I
Okay.
hope as an older generation to help young people, or at least my daughters, to overcome all the difficulties that we are facing.
Thank you, Olga.
To reiterate a couple of things, I noted that my grandparents had 4 children and they had 16 grandchildren. My parents had 4 children and they had 12 grandchildren. We had 4 children and we only have 3 grandchildren. And And there you go. And then additionally, one of our sons and his wife, they wanted to have children, and they were so busy playing and gallivanting around and having a wonderful life that now it's too late. It's too late. They're in their 40s, and you know, it just isn't going to work. So that just reiterates some conversation we've had here.
Okay, and just 1 second, Luis, we get you 1 second, Luis. Thank you, Cher. And something from the audience, I just want to share with you. It says it's just a comment. I think the paper, and this goes back maybe to what you were talking about, Alice. So I think the paper was just shared with us to illustrate some of the ideals of a more cooperative society with strong spiritual values. But I don't necessarily think the method they use to achieve this high level of society is the only way we can get to that point. We have to carve our own path.
Interesting.
Luis?
Yeah, fully agree with that. And it goes some way to what Alice was sharing with us, that they're trying to, it's a little bit what I was hinting at when I said that they put it there so that we can look at ourselves rather than say, you have to do this, you know. There's patterns in the universe, but that doesn't seem to be some of those that we should be following. Well, there were 2 things that I wanted to share. On the one hand, commenting on what Olga shared with us. Another staggering statistic is that over the past 125 years, the planet has gone on a net number of inhabitants basis from 1.7 billion to 8 billion. If we remind ourselves that the Urantia book tells us that we've been around as humankind for roughly 500,000 years, growing that much in such a short period is something that we just take for granted because we are part of it, but has created huge, immense pressures to all of those that have been trying to continue to run the planet the way they designed it the 500 years prior.
Yes.
And so one of the things that became clear during the pandemic, and this goes a little bit some way to the works that we did during the Urantia Hackathon in 2020, is the systems under which we live have been exposed as being inefficient, insufficient, and highly concentrated to continue to serve the interests of small groups of people as they always have. Because let us reflect for a second that a lot of the pressures that come for younger generations to not be able to afford housing, which is something that Olga shared with us, to not be willing to have more children because of the costs involved, because healthcare costs are so high, because education is so costly and so difficult to get access to, and so on and so forth, come from the whole scaffolding of a system that has been created as such, where education is really part of a whole integrated organization in society that serves the profit motive. And the Urantia book tells us that so long as we continue to have profit motive instead of service motive as our guideline, those ideals that the person sharing with us on the chat is referring to are going to be very difficult to achieve. And even as we know that the Urantia book is supposed to be serve us for several hundreds of years, some of us believe that it hints at least one millennium, then some of the information that Olga has shared with us can begin to help us think about how can we stop coming all together and concentrating in big urban centers. For example, if you look at the largest 200 cities in the world, they take roughly 80% of the population. And if you take every single human citizen existing in the world today, and will you put us together on a single area, common area, the area that we would occupy more or less is equivalent to the surface of the island of Cyprus in Europe. Just think about that. That's how small we are compared to the planet. And yet, we all come together and are bundled together in ways that make it extremely expensive for us to live that way. So some of the trends that we see in the world happening already by those that are trying to create eco-villages and build self-sustained societies and the likes is beginning to show us the glimpses of what life can be like in the future as we start escaping the urban centers and start trying to live more harmoniously with nature, more self-service and supplied, and hopefully in greater harmony that then will give way to sharing and collaboration more, greater teamwork that will then incentivize greater spiritual value sharing in society and within the families as well. That's what I hope anyway.
Yeah, that's good. We have to have ideals before we can move forward. I mean, that's a necessary part of it. And unfortunately, we have to get to tipping points usually before something happens. Vicky?
Yes, I'm thinking about atheism right now. That seems to be one of the factors of people being not interested in having children. I mean, I'm sure you can, in Spain, Olga, the Catholic Church was very strong, and in the Catholic Church it's almost a mandate to have children, And Olga, I couldn't remember in your presentation, is atheism on the rise in Spain?
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't say it in my presentation, but it is because the Catholic Church is losing more and more influence in the society since, 30 years from now.
Yeah, and that was probably a big reason for having big families and stuff because of that sort of mandate to have children. But I know, with the Urantia book, at least, I know having children was a big influence on me because I did get the Urantia book when I was young, and it made a big influence on me for wanting to have a family and children. And another thing too, it gives us this long distance view of our eternal career. I mean, what a lot of young women face is, do I pursue my career, try to establish myself in having a great career? But if they had the perspective of the Urantia book that you will have lots of opportunities to have an eternal career and do all the things that you would really like to do here on earth, that would be a comfort to young women who maybe do want to stay at home and take care of their kids and not pursue the career path. So
I have a question that has been coming from the audience for a while back is, could you perhaps say something about the Mondragon cooperative movement in Spain relative to the comparisons you made from Spain in general? Is it any better as an example for us here on Urantia? Are any of you, Olga, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I've heard from that cooperative. It's working for decades from now. But again, it's a private initiative. It's not something that it's governmental. So it's an interesting initiative, and it has working for many years. But my thing or my point in my presentation is that this what I said about the alienation, it comes from the state, so to speak, and this there are initiatives like that in schools that tried a different approach to teach children and parents and so on. But my point is that it's good that we have these initiatives, but it's not enough. We need to for this to be more general, more global, so to speak.
It's a starting point, though, right?
Yeah, it's a starting point and very interesting, but we need more.
Alice?
Thank you, Olga.
Yes, thank you. Alice, you had something?
So one thing that they don't really talk a lot about in this paper is the role of like intergenerational families, you know, or even intergenerational homes. Sometimes when they say no two families live under the same roof, I ask the question, well, what are they defining as a family? Is it the nuclear family, or do they have such large yards because they have the grandparents living with them?
That's a great question, Vicki.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
And there's so much that we try to cram into, you know, a 1 or 2 decade time frame. We've got having kids, rather finding a partner, having kids, starting a career, spending all that time just raising the kids and wanting to do a good job of it and being present. And there's really a lot that we are asking of people who are in their 20s and their 30s. And so I'd be very interested to learn about the strength of their family networks and also their neighbor networks. I have been both a stay-at-home mom and a working mom, though I work from home, so I'm still kind of present. And it is very challenging to try and fit all that in. I don't even work full-time, I work part-time. And even still, I feel the strain of trying to do that. And then add to that, when you're just starting out and you've got young babies and you're starting in your career, you're also at your lowest income point. So that adds to the strain as well.
When our kids were young, we chose for me not to work. And we live in Florida and we did not have air conditioning because we couldn't afford it. We drove an older one vehicle for the family, and I cooked all our meals at home, which saved a lot of money, and we saved a lot of money on clothing and transportation. And so there is a matter of choice, although I'm not sure it's recognizable or even doable today.
I think it is a lot harder to be a stay-at-home mom now because the things that I ran into, so I was a stay-at-home mom throughout my children's entire younger years. I started working after the youngest one went to kindergarten. And what I ran into was that there weren't other stay-at-home moms around me. So all their kids were away at daycare. So I wanted to send my 4-year-old to play with a friend, but there weren't friends around within, they weren't just down the block. I'd have to get in the car and drive 20 minutes to my other stay-at-home mom friends. And then also so many people are relying a lot more, not on having their kids have neighborhood friends, but on things like sports. And my kids all have also enjoyed sports, but a lot of that stuff requires payment. You have to pay to be a part of an after-school activity. And you kind of have to get your kids into those in order for them to have things to do, because there aren't as many available neighborhood kids. Even if there are kids who live nearby, they're busy with other paid activities in the evenings.
Yeah, that's a huge balancing act with both your time and your funds.
Mhm.
Got a question for the audience for Sebastian. Says you're a fairly new parent. Could you say how that's changed your life?
In our case, we reduced our working hours a lot. I also stayed at home for 1 year. I had the possibility to do that. I also want, for me, it was very important to be near my kids, my first child, and also I plan to do the same for the second one. And if we have to work at all, then both my wife and I reduce our working time to up to 50%. We decided not to send our children to daycare, take care of them ourselves as much as possible, as long as possible, ideally until kindergarten age, although maybe sending the oldest one at the age of 2 would have been feasible. And yeah, the way it has impacted me was to first, it is a very transforming and wonderful experience, as I had shared with the Spanish community. But also it requires you to rearrange your life, your priorities, your time, at least for the first couple of years. And it is demanding, it is challenging, emotionally, psychologically, from a management point of view. So it takes a well-coordinated effort in terms of discussion in the couple and coordination and so on. Yeah, and a lot of activities and a lot of free time went away, and this was why I said unfortunately I cannot continue to serve the Urantia International Association anymore, at least for the upcoming years. Yeah.
Yes, Jesus put the whole universe on hold to finish his family. Luis.
Thank you. Chair, I just wanted to touch on what you actually said, which I think is extremely important. Remind ourselves that we can always choose differently. And to choose better when we choose differently is one of the ways in which we can translate the meaning of being or trying to be spirit-led. Because if Paper 72 and Olga's presentation that is inviting us to reflect on all of these topics is reminding us of that initial point, which is that the family is a quintessential institution for spiritual education. It is important that part of the spiritual education involves the teaching children and young adults that they can make spirit-led decisions, even if we don't use those words, by helping them reflect on their decisions, including decisions as fundamental as what to study when they are completely unprepared to make that decision, that will be transcendental in their lives, their happiness, the joy, the type of partner that they're going to find in life, and so on and so forth. So going back to spiritual education and making those choices being spirit-led is what I just wanted to be.
Thank you, Luis. I have one little thing to share about changing children's ideas. And with 4 kids 1 year apart, we had a lot of rivalry going on. And when one of the children would tattle on another, the price of that was to say something nice about your sibling, so that it took that mindset. And consequently, it also reduced tattling, because often they didn't want to say something nice about their sibling, but the important things came through.
That's great.
And it worked.
Thank you so much, Olga and panelists and audience.